Macau, known to the world as the gambling capital of the world and Las Vegas of the Orient, a place where nothing can go wrong, or can it? Unknown to everyone, there is a great secret behind its success.
Welcome to episode 95 of Not Just Games. I'm Joey. In March 2019, a horror game which was made in China was launched. It was a game created by an indie game developer in Macau named Fight the Horror. The developers claimed that the game was inspired by the true historical events of Macau. For example, the fire of St. Paul, the 8 Immortal Restaurant, One Armed Commander, Fake Gods, Break to Hell, The Devil Casino, and Rest in Peace. At that time, many players were interested. This game's gameplay had the nature of team survival, where a few players would form teams to solve a puzzle and defeat various monsters to win the game. Each match will last for 7 days in-game. So each night, everyone will even have to hide in a safe house to get through the night. It doesn't sound bad, but in the end when the game was launched, its quality was awful. Stiff movements, confusing gameplay, terrible network, and full of bugs. Considering how this game was developed by a small team in Macau, I assumed that their abilities were just not up to par. What a shame. However, the stories the game was inspired by sparked the interest of many. I too spent a long time researching online. Due to the poor quality of the game, players couldn't fully obtain clues about the stories from the game. There are differing opinions about this online as well, so no one had any leads. So what do we do now? For this, Dr. Joey personally went to Macau and panned the area in order to explore the truth behind these mysterious historical events. The Big Five of Church of St. Paul. This story originated from Macau's landmark building, the ruins of St. Paul's. Its predecessor was the Church of St. Paul. It was the first Baroque building in China. How did the church turn into ruins? It's because of the numerous fires which destroyed the church. So now, only this thin front remains. As it looked like ruins, it was known as the ruins of St. Paul's. In 1565, an evangelist priest built a chapel of Our Lady in this area, following the arrival of more and more Western missionaries to the east. In order to provide these Western missionaries with a place to preach and learn Chinese, the church back then gathered funds and built St. Paul's College and Church. At that time, it was the first Western university in the Far East. In 1559, there was a fire in the Church of St. Paul. In 1601, there was another fire. It was on the brink of collapse. Then a typhoon came along for the ride, inflicting huge damage to the church and college. But at that time, Macau's economy thrived and its people were financially stable. Everyone was prepared to help rebuild the Church of St. Paul. As they were rebuilding, Western missionaries, Chinese artisans, and followers who escaped from Japan to Macau all came together to fix the building. Thus, while the main body of the building was of a Western style, it still had elements of a Chinese lion statue, Chinese characters, and Japanese chrysanthemums. It is the fruitful result of the blending of Eastern and Western cultures and arts. After it was rebuilt, there was a clock tower at the right side. In it was a clock gifted by Louis XIV of France. When the time came, the striking of the clock would resound through the whole of Macau. This was the then most magnificent church in Asia. During the pinnacle of this church and college, it nurtured many outstanding figures and was greatly influential in China and East Asia. However, in 1835, firewood in the kitchen of St. Paul's Seminary caught fire once more. Again, the fire spread to the college and church. In just 2 hours, this germ, which carried a mixture of Eastern and Western arts, perished in the fire. Moreover, as the then King of Portugal survived an assassination attempt, in his anger, he ordered the expulsion of the Jesuits. The drastic change in the church caused these missionaries to leave Macau from the beginning of 1762. Thus, Macau no longer had a religious support to once again rebuild the church. The priests who stayed behind simply flattened the ruins and turned it into St. Paul's Cemetery. You can still see the cemetery at the back of the current St. Paul's. Until 1904, the priests tried to rebuild it again, but times have changed. In 1910, the Portugal monarchy was overthrown, and the country's churches became state-owned assets. Moreover, due to the difficulties in gathering funds, there were no longer skillful architects to support it. As such, everyone simply left behind the front part of the church, which has then become the ruins of St. Paul's until today. But until now, there's an urban legend in Macau saying that if you walk down the steps of St. Paul's at 12 AM and remember how many steps there are, then when you walk up again, you realize there's an additional step. One Armed Commander. Macau was leased by the Ming Dynasty to the Portuguese in 1557. At that time, the Ming Dynasty even set up a government to manage Macau, and Portugal would periodically pay rent to the Ming Dynasty. Then in 1849 of the Qing Dynasty, Portugal directly occupied the Barrier Gate. They stopped paying rent to the Qing Dynasty and turned from a concession to a colony. This series of events was done by João Maria Ferreira do Amaro, a high-ranking officer in the Portuguese Navy. In 1821, when he was still a midshipman, Amaro followed the Portuguese royal fleet into the colonial war. In the end, he raised his arm, which had been blown on by the cannon, and yelled, "Long live Portugal!" and encouraged the soldiers to continue fighting. Thus, the Portuguese dubbed him the One-Armed Commander. In 1846, he was appointed as the governor of Macau. Originally, the Portuguese managed their own people, but 2 years later, he demanded all Chinese residents in Macau to pay tax. Then, he expelled the Qing government from Macau and governed it as if it were Portugal's. Also, to expand the colony, he moved the ancestral tombs of the locals. Of course, the Qing government was angry. "At least the land to you, how did it become yours?" The locals were angry. "We were born and bred here and now you want to tax me and move my tombs?" Thus, rumors of an attempt to assassinate Amaro spread, but he couldn't be bothered. Then on the 22nd of August 1849, when he and his adjutant rode out of town, they were met with a few villagers who faked a complaint. While Amaro was accepting the written complaint, the leader Shen Zhiliang slashed Amaro with a knife, and the others also set upon him, ultimately killing him. After that, Shen Zhiliang took his head and arm and escaped. Due to this incident, the Qing dynasty in Portugal had a falling out. They began to attack each other near the barricade. Finally, when both governments saw that things were getting out of hand, in the name of helping Portugal to find a killer, the Qing government returned the head and arm to protect his 7 other associates. Shen Zhiliang surrendered, and due to immense pressure, the Qing government ordered his execution. Portugal was still angry, hence they mobilized an expeditionary force and was prepared to crusade against the Qing government. However, in the end, the shipmaster died on his sickbed, while another ship exploded when they were celebrating the king's birthday. More than 200 people died. Thus, they cancelled the expedition and botched this matter. Individuals from both countries involved in the assassination of Amaro were seen as their respective nations' heroes. Even now, there's Shen Zhiliang's memorial tomb and statue in Zhuhai Qianshan Road. While in Macau, there's a place called Rotunda de Ferreira do Amaro. At that time, Portugal built a statue of him as a memoir. Right after the return of Macau in 1999, China requested Portugal to take the statue with them before they leave. Portuguese had no choice but to move it back home. Now Rotunda de Ferreira do Amaro is merely a plaza. The Fake Gods. A weird name, isn't it? According to the internet, back then, in the Escola dos Moradores do Paterni, a female nurse committed suicide in a man's toilet. This became one of the 5 most iconic ghost stories in Macau. However, there was too little info on the net, and even though I personally went there and found the school, the people nearby didn't know much about the story either. All they know was that the school used to be a cemetery and a hospital. Although the school seems to be a little old, and there's a temple opposite it, this school appears to be developing well. There's no sign of the urban legend whatsoever. The 8 Immortals restaurant. I think everyone is familiar with this. It's the sensational pork bun murders. As many people were influenced by the Hong Kong movie The Human Pork Bun, they thought this incident happened in Hong Kong. In reality, it happened in Macau. The street I'm in now is where the 8 Immortals restaurant was located, and the pork bun murders occurred here. On the 8th of August 1985, someone discovered 8 pieces of human limbs on Kolani Haksa Beach. At first, the police thought that some unlucky swimmer had been eaten up by a shark. It wasn't until later when they found more limbs in the trash did the whole Macau start to panic. Even after a long time, the police could not solve the case, until one day, they received a letter from the brother of the 8 Immortals restaurant's owner, asking about him as they lost contact recently. It was then that the police found the key to this case. It was true that the restaurant owner's whole family had gone missing. Meanwhile, a man named Wang Zhiheng took over the restaurant, thus he became the main suspect. Following the clues, the police found that Wang Zhiheng used to gamble with the restaurant's owner quite often. One time with 2,000 yuan, he managed to win 180,000 yuan from the owner, who refused to pay. After failing to ask for his money, the angry Wang Zhiheng murdered the owner's whole family and used their body parts to make soup, which was later sold in the restaurant. Other huge chunks were disposed of as well. However, what terrified the people was that the corpses were incomplete and quite a few were still not found. Before this, the restaurant's business was flourishing and many people had visited this place, hence they were worried if they had eaten something dirty. While in prison, Wang Zhiheng killed himself with a cancer pool, causing the truth to be undiscoverable. Finally, Hong Kong turned this incident into a movie and drama. Every time these programs are shown, pork bun sales in Macau and Hong Kong will be greatly affected. As for the restaurant, it was continuously overhauled by the locals as it carried very bad luck. Now it's probably located around Macau's Area Preta, at the valley behind Victoria Hotel. Based on the internet's photo, I searched for a long time and found the approximate area, but I was still unsure of which job it was. This is also partly because I don't feel it would be okay to ask around, as it might affect their businesses. The final 3, the Devil Casino, Rest in Peace, and Breakthrough Hell. I asked quite a few Macau people and still got no clue about them. This was because the information provided by a term was far too little, and there are simply no reliable clues to investigate. Nonetheless, my personal visit to Macau this time allowed me to learn more about Macau's historical events. Next time, I'll talk to you guys about even more exciting things. Thanks for watching this episode of Not Just Games. If you liked this video, please click the subscribe button. I'm Joey, and I'll see you next time.